Good morning again. Is life guaranteed? Somebody say yes. You know, the older I get, the more I appreciate the uncertainties of life. Not that I necessarily like them, but I recognize that there are circumstances beyond our control that affect our lives. And that as we live in our life, a lot of it is kind of by happenstance. External things beyond our control affect our lives, often in a great way. Some of you that are older, have you had anything in your life that has just changed how your life went? You know, you had certain plans and goals and agendas, but something happened and your life was forever changed. For younger kids that think you got it all figured out, pay attention to all hands that went up. Because there's a lot in life that just is beyond our control. It's full, our prayer list. We go through the prayer list. Do you think Sandy Everett planned to have kidney failure? No. These are things that we have to go through in life. Death, job, location, health. These are things that happen unexpectedly that we have to deal with. So, how do we live life here in the valley, here in this world? How do we live it for God's glory when we have all these unexpected events that occur? So today what I'd like to do, as we look at how to deal with life, is look at the life of Daniel. First, I'm going to just recap the first 6 chapters of Daniel. It opens up with the Hebrew nation being taken into the Babylonian captivity. That includes Daniel and a few of his friends. We had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they're in the Babylonian captivity, and as was the custom of the day, the captors, the conquerors, would look at the new subjects, if you will, and they would look for the best and the brightest. And when they found the best and the brightest, they would put them in positions of authority and leadership. And that was the case for Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were pretty smart guys. So then we come to chapter 2. And King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, a prophetic dream. And he wants to know what it means. And in fact, he knows his court well enough that he goes, if you guys can really interpret the dream, you can tell me what my dream was. And he doesn't even tell them the dream. And they can't do it. But along comes Daniel. And they ask Daniel, can you interpret the dream? Daniel says, no, but my God can. And Daniel does. He not only reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream, but he reveals what it means. And Nebuchadnezzar praised God. Next we come to Daniel chapter 3. Now, Daniel's not even mentioned in this chapter. You know, maybe he was off, you know, in another precinct or something, taking care of some business, or if you follow extra biblical sources, maybe this is when he was off killing a dragon. But basically, Nebuchadnezzar erects a statue. And he says, when the music plays, everyone bow down to the statue, or, you know, you'll die. So, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are there. The music plays, and they say, no, we're not going to bow down. So they come before the king. And the king is not very happy. and he decides he's going to put them to death. I mean, he is furious. He is upset. And he's think, you think your God can save you from me? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, well, we can't save ourselves, but God can. So they get thrown in the furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar looks in there and he sees these guys walking around. He starts thinking, oh, that's not normal. So he says, all right, you guys can come out now. And they come out and they are unharmed. They don't even smell like fire. Now, I kind of like the smell of fire personally, but, they don't even have the smell of fire on them. And Nebuchadnezzar, again, praises God. Nebuchadnezzar then has another prophetic dream. And again, his wise men cannot interpret it. And again, it comes to Daniel. And Daniel says, you will become prideful. You will live as a wild man. But then your kingdom will be restored. And this comes to pass. Nebuchadnezzar says, look at all that I have done. Next thing you know, he's out with the cows. But after 7 years, he looks up and says, God is God. And he is restored. And he again praises God. But then Nebuchadnezzar dies. Now his son Belshazzar is king. And as I was watching the American Bible Challenge this morning, Belshazzar was one of the answers. And I knew it. Okay, so Belshazzar is very prideful. He's thrown this big feast. And in fact, he took the conquest, the implements, the cups and all that from the temple, and he's using them in the feast. He's arrogant. We got these items from the temple of the holy God, and we're using them for our feast. And his hand shows up and starts writing on the wall. I mean, that would get your attention, I would think. Imagine if a hand started writing on a wall over there. So, he's pretty excited. He wants interpretation. And none of his wise men can provide an interpretation. And the queen comes along and says, whenever your dad needed an interpretation, you get this guy named Daniel, and he would take care of it. So in comes Daniel, and Belshazzar says, can you interpret? And he says, no, I can't, but my God can. And he gives Belshazzar the interpretation. His days are numbered. He will not be king long. He was weighed and found wanting. And Belshazzar was killed. And the kingdom was divided. So now we have a new king, King Darius. He's a Mede. After the Babylonians, the Medes came along. Daniel continued to distinguish himself. He always sought God, and God blessed him, and he continued to distinguish himself. And so his peers were upset. They were envious. Who is this foreigner that is over us? So they decided they're going to do Daniel in. And they search and they hunt and they do audits and they do all the things that you do. And they could find nothing against Daniel. Nothing. And I'm sure they looked hard. Then they said, if we're going to get anything against Daniel, it's going to have to be with his God, because they knew how faithfully he served his God. So they kind of tricked the king, and they passed a bad law, much like Congress today. And so they passed this law, which says that you will worship no one but Darius the king. So then they waited, because they knew that Daniel went and prayed to his God 3 times a day. And sure enough, actually I think, all right. And sure enough, Daniel went and prayed. They said, aha, we got him. Hey, Darius, he was praying to someone other than you. I find Darius's reaction interesting. Obviously, I think Daniel had become a very close friend and a trusted confidant because Darius was quite upset that he had to fulfill the law and have Daniel killed. In fact, he spent a lot of time going through the law to see if he could find a loophole, and none was to be found. So Daniel gets thrown in a lion's den. Darius stays up all night fasting. Again, I think that's quite impressive that this foreign king was so concerned about Daniel. And in the morning, he runs out there and says, Daniel, are you safe? Daniel said, God preserved me. And Darius praises God. And then the Persian Empire comes, and Daniel serves Cyrus, the Persian king. So to summarize, Daniel was recognized by all the kings as wise and serving the one true God. We had the Babylonian kings, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. We had the Medo king, Darius, and the Persian king, Cyrus. We see that Daniel always gave glory and honor to God. And we see that he was always trustworthy in what he did. He was despised by his peers for his excellence. He made them look bad. He set a standard that they didn't like. Daniel always sought God, and because of that, he was protected, promoted, and praised. Daniel was weighed and found to be exemplary. So what can we learn from Daniel's example as we face the uncertainties of life? You know, I kind of wanted to have a Father's Day sermon, but, and like I said, I kind of forgot. But really, the points that I make here about Daniel and how he lived his life and got through the uncertainties of life should be something that all fathers, everyone, should try to do and learn from. So, what can we learn? How do we deal with the uncertainties of life as we learn from Daniel?
Well, Daniel turned all his uncertainties to God. If we do that, God will
Provide?
above and beyond for us.
Right.
What a special word for that.
Faith. First thing we see is culpability. Our sin is not our own. It affects not only us, but our families and our culture. So therefore, we live in a fallen world. It doesn't do any good or serve any purpose to sit there and say, this is not the way it should be, and get upset about it and point our finger at, this is not right. And that's not what Daniel did. Daniel said, this is the circumstance I'm in, and I'm going to find a way to honor God in it. We cannot change our circumstance. We have to accept and improve and find a way to glorify God in it. Next, we should coalesce with the world. Daniel did not antagonize the heathen horde. He sought to live in peace with them, inasmuch as he was able to do so. Romans 12:18 says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. Don't antagonize. Don't look down on. Don't judge. we tend to look at those who don't know Christ, well, we tend to look down on them. And we judge them. Oh, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't talk like that. You shouldn't drink that. You shouldn't say that. Why not? Just because we know what glorifying God is, they don't. When we do that, all we're doing is building barriers between them and Christ. We need to love them, come alongside them, and live in peace with them as much as we are able to do so that we might win them and point them to Christ. I mentioned Facebook before. This is a little something that I saw on Facebook, but I think it's kind of good. No God, no peace. No God, N-O, no peace. Next, Daniel sought counsel. He sought Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that they should seek God for wise counsel. In Ecclesiastes, it says that two are better than one, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly torn apart. Daniel was wise enough to know that he didn't have to go it alone. Why do you think God ordained the church? We are here to do life together. That's the purpose of the church. That we glorify God individually and as a community. That we don't have to live or struggle in the valley by ourselves. That we have people to encourage us, to help us along. Daniel, as great as he was in the kingdom on earth, was wise enough to know they needed friends. Pride stands alone, but a community of believers stands together. Next, we learn from Daniel that he was committed. It says that Daniel made up his mind not to defile himself. He was committed to honoring God, whatever the outcome might be. He stood for God's truth. And if that put him in opposition to those around him, then so be it. But he stood for God's truth, and God protected him. I came across this. I thought I'd read it to you. Commitment is what transforms a promise into reality. It is the words that speak boldly of your intentions and the actions which speak louder than words. It is making the time when there is none, coming through time after time after time, year after year after year. Commitment is the stuff character is made of, the power to change the face of things. It is the daily triumph of integrity over skepticism. I thought that was pretty good. We need to be committed to God in all areas of our life. And whatever we have allowed to be a barrier in our life must be torn down. Next, Daniel was consistent. He lived faithfully in all areas of his life. Again, when his peers were trying to put him down and find fault, trust me, they looked diligently. They went through everything and they could find no basis of corruption. Daniel consistently served God in his personal and his work life. They weren't two different things. All areas of his life were committed to God. And when the ordinance was passed that you shall bow down to no others, that was something that he could not live in peace with. He had to continue to serve his God. And he continued as before, giving thanks to God. In 1 Peter, it says that we should live our lives in such a way that when people make an accusation against us, they will be put to shame. That's integrity. That's consistency. And that's commitment. We need to be consistent in prayer, the study of God's Word, the meditation on God's Word. It's not enough to just read it. What does it mean? What does it say? How does it apply to me? And fellowship, the gathering together. Because, as I said, that's why God ordained the church. We can't just live a life of isolation. We need others. You know, that's part of being in the image of God. God is not singular. He is triune. You know, love existed with God before we ever were. And that's part of who we are. We need others. So if we're consistent, we live a life without hypocrisy. And we need to break down the barriers that hold us back from being consistent in our prayer, study of God's Word, and fellowship. Next, we need to convict. If we are living for God, our life will set a standard, much as Daniel's did. It will convict those around us. They will see how they fall short and how God is truly God. Daniel's example is one of faithfulness, dedication both to God and to his job, you know, the task that he had at hand. And he always gave a testimony of God. Remember, when Daniel was asked for an interpretation, he says, I can't, but my God can. He always put God first, and he always let them know that his wisdom came from God. When Daniel was rescued from the lion's den, this is what King Darius wrote, and I think it's worth reading. Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in all the land, may your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and to tremble before the God of Daniel. This is a pagan king, if you will, who has come to recognize that Daniel's God is God indeed. And throughout his entire kingdom, he says, we will recognize the God of Daniel. He mentions Daniel by name, as if everyone in the kingdom would know who he was. Daniel was an important person because he served God. For he is a living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. That's quite a testimony from a pagan king, who maybe we'll meet in heaven someday, given a testimony like that. Daniel's life was a living, breathing sermon to everyone he came in contact with. The conduct of our life is to proclaim God. So to wrap up, we are culpable for the state of the world, but that's not an excuse. We need to find a way to glorify God. We must be friends in as much as we're able to do so with the world, so we can win them to Christ and show them Christ's love. Don't let pride get in the way. Seek godly counsel. Don't think it too small or too big. Seek the counsel of good believers. Commit to serving God in every aspect of your life, as Daniel did. There is nothing outside of God's purview. Be consistent in your service and in your testimony at all times. People see that. And if we do all that, our life will be a testimony to the one true God, and will bring conviction to those we encounter. So take a stand. So when the storms of life come, if we live by the example of Daniel, we will weather those storms. We will see them through. Not that they won't be hard, as I'm sure Daniel struggled with some things like the lion's den, his friends in the fiery furnace. Those were not easy decisions, but they were faithful. They were consistent. They were committed to their God, and their God protected them. So now we come to the invitation. So if you have business with God, I invite you to come forward at this time as we sing our closing hymn. We saw that Daniel's life was weighed and found exemplary. We found that Belshazzar's was weighed and found wanting.